speakers, it's time that we introduce our first speaker of the day. Just makes the most out of today. And so this person, not only she's the best-selling author of the book UX Strategy, but she also did at least 2 other amazing things. The first one is she flew all the way from sunny Los Angeles. And the second one is that she's going to spend the next 30 minutes to make us discover everything about discovery. How amazing is that? Please help me welcome Jaime Levy.
Danke. Hallo, hallo Berlin. Willkommen. Es stimmt, ich komme aus Los Angeles. Aber jetzt lebe ich in Berlin. So I took the train here like everybody else. Okay, so let's get started. And hello to everybody out in cyberspace as well. So in June, my son Terry graduated from high school. It was really, really cool to see my son, who had worked really hard through high school to get good enough grades to get accepted to his first choice college at the very last minute, write his essays here in Berlin last summer with me, and really step it up so that he could move away and start a new life. He started college last week. But it was also an exciting time for me. I'm now an empty nester. I can do my own thing. And for the last few years, I've been coming back and forth to Berlin because I was thinking this is where I think I want to live the next chapter or many chapters of my life. I had first come to Berlin in 1986 when I was 20 years old. I just fell in love with it. I stayed in an attic apartment in Schönenberg, and I met all kinds of incredible people. And so I started coming back here, and I started meeting new friends in the last few years, thanks to Bumble, actually, Bumble friends, and meeting my partner and really getting to know the town. I also stayed in a sublet of a sublet of a sublet. And I knew this couldn't last for long because they were constantly telling me they were going to kick me out. I kind of was frustrated because I didn't have a mailbox or a buzzer, so I couldn't even get an Amazon package. This was just not working. I knew once I got here in June that I had to find my own flat, a long-term flat, not some bullshit sublet lease. And so I thought, no problem. I lived in New York forever. I can find an apartment here, not a problem. And that was when I hit a wall. No, not that wall. I hit this wall. The fact that what was once this cheap place that you could come and live was no longer. It had been gentrified a while ago, and housing prices had been shooting up. And on top of that, even if you're applying to get a flat here, you're competing against sometimes hundreds or 1,000 other people for that same flat. And it was exasperated by all kinds of things, whether it be regulations that were going sideways with the government, or the Ukraine war, which was making it even more harder for things to get stabilized here. And the cost of the flats was crazy. They were just skyrocketing. And I thought, this is a real wicked problem. Perhaps I should solve it using my own UX strategy techniques and embark on a discovery phase. Now, discovery has actually been, something that we do all the time, right? It's the act of learning something. It's the act of figuring something out for the first time, and exploration. But it actually comes, this concept of a discovery phase, from the legal profession. It's this idea that if you're an attorney and you're about to go to trial, that you gather as much evidence as possible so there's no surprises, so that when you get up there and you're trying to convince the jury and a judge in terms of your stance, your strategy, that you're prepared with this evidence. And so the idea of the discovery phase is to have a preliminary phase in front of UX design, one that involves research, one that involves looking at the problem space and reframing the problem, and trying to also gather enough evidence to go through what we all know is the double diamond, where you're trying to figure out what's the problem space, define, discover, and then the solution space. So to start with the problem space, you really need to focus on what are the pain points? What is happening with the people that I'm trying to solve the problem for? And so I thought, well, what's my problem? What's my big problem, my wicked problem? And that would be I'm trying to find a long-term flat in Berlin, and that when I go to the most popular real estate web platform called Emo Scout, most of the flats are deactivated within minutes sometimes. So this was very concerning. And so, of course, I started with writing a problem statement. And that would be, newcomers and current residents of Berlin are having a hard time finding a flat with an unlimited lease due to a massive housing shortage. And why it's not just newcomers like myself is because current residents feel it too. People who have been, let's say, living in a flat for 10, sometimes 20 years, paying a few €100 sometimes, they're lucky they have this amazing deal, but at the same time, they're trapped in that amazing deal. So let's say if they want to start a family or move to a different part, the chances of them being able to exchange or find a place that's even comparable to what they pay is very unlikely. And so this was what I started as my problem statement. And so then it came time to think about what were the discovery phase techniques I was going to use. And there's so many: stakeholder interviews, competitive research, doing ideation workshops, customer interviews, and prototype experiments. I decided I would try these 5, starting with stakeholder interviews. So stakeholder interviews involve talking to the folks in the C-suite, typically, to really understand what are their concerns, what do they care about, who do they see as the competitors. Really trying to understand how they perceive their own brand, what their goals are, what would make their job easier when they showed up to work the next day, really understanding that. And there's a lot of things to consider when you're planning to do your stakeholder interviews. The first thing is you want to be sure to prepare for the interviews by getting domain expertise. You really want to understand as much as you can about the particular vertical that you might be building a platform for, or the content, or whatever it is, so that you're not asking questions that are truly obvious. You do not want to interview critical stakeholders in a group if you can avoid it. The reason being that if you get a few people in the room, they're going to bias each other, or the person who has the highest title will talk and the other ones won't say their opinions because they don't want to, say something that will be in conflict with the CEO, let's say. And so you want to try to interview each of them on their own. You want to research each stakeholder on LinkedIn or in Google to really understand their background. And maybe you'll find something that you have in common with them. Perhaps you went to the same university or something to sort of break the ice so they, feel like, oh, wow, they're interested in me, right? Because you're trying to build this sort of camaraderie. You don't want to waste their time by asking them Googleable questions. So look at all the questions that you prepare and make sure that you can't find the answers on your own. Ask questions to help understand their business model, but do not share what other stakeholders tell you with the ones that you're interviewing, because they're going to be concerned, oh, they're going to say what I just said to the other stakeholders, or, yeah, I agree with what they said, sure. right? This isn't the time for sharing that. Save that for the end. You want to build camaraderie with these stakeholders so that they trust you, so that when you come back to them later on with your ideas, with your strategy, that you'll have an easier time getting buy-in. Don't ask too many close-ended questions, pretty much like doing user research. You want to ask open-ended questions, get them talking. Identify goals, expectations. Look for ideas where, get them kind of talking about innovation, what they see as innovation, right? And don't interrupt. Let them talk. Give them their time. And then, of course, at the end, you want to synthesize everything that you heard across all the different stakeholders into one place, whether it be a deck or a brief or some kind of documentation that you then follow up with a group meeting on site or online. And you say, here's what I heard. Mostly everybody had similar viewpoints about this, but I heard some conflicting ideas. And this can be a great starting point for an ideation workshop or an alignment workshop or something to really try to get them all on the same page about a few things. And if there's areas of conflict or you just can't get consensus, then say, these are opportunities for me to explore or for my team to explore to really see what's the best way forward. Now, in my case, I was the stakeholder. I was looking for the flat for myself. So I looked in the mirror, that's the younger version of me, and I said, what are my business requirements for my flat? Well, I really love Schönenberg. I needed it to be 2.5 rooms. I wanted to have at least a small room for my son should he come visit, or an office for my partner. I needed it to be 75 plus meters because I need a place that I can grow into, not grow out of. I want a balcony. I love that. And not a walk-up. I'd been living in a fifth floor walk-up and would prefer to find a different way to get exercise. So then it came time to do competitive research. So competitive research is also called desk research sometimes, or market research, whatever you want to call it. It's looking at the current marketplace to really understand market conditions, how big the market is, so many different aspects of it. And how you go about doing that is by identifying the competition and then really delving in to understand the different attributes about that competition, understanding the business model, the revenue streams, not just UX benchmarking. Now, I wrote a couple chapters about this, and I did a workshop about it yesterday, so the folks who were there already know this. But what's important is that you research your direct and indirect competitors in a systematic fashion. Don't just throw everything into a Google Doc or a FigJam board or a Miro board if you really want to do it methodically. Keep it organized. You can go to my website, userexperiencestrategy.com, and download a free toolkit that has the spreadsheet that you just saw, so that will help you. Do not focus only on the usability of a product. We're doing product strategy. We're not just focused on design. This is bigger than that. Capture qualitative and quantitative data points to benchmark the UX and business-centered attributes. Be careful not to go down rabbit holes, because what could happen is you're going to focus too much on one competitor and use up all your time and not enough on the other. Then you're going to have mounds of data that needs to be distilled, because what you're trying to turn it into is competitive intelligence that can be actionable. So you do not aggregate your content in a disorganized way. You need a way to look at it and be analytical. Present your findings once you have formed an opinion using storytelling and visual imagery. Do not just submit your research and kind of throw it at them like, hey, here's what I got. This is what we should do. They need context. They need to be led on the journey that you took, looking at all the competitors, so that when they get to the very end, they can understand why your product strategy is aligned with the value proposition that they had in mind. Take a stand about the direction. Don't just be negative. Say, here's what I learned, here's where I think we should go, and here's why. Right? They need to know this. And then, of course, do not summarize your findings with these sort of cliches. Oh, we need to simplify. We need to optimize the UX. That's table stakes. Of course you need to do that with any app or web platform that you're building. And at the end, you're going to have some output that you can share with them. No, you don't need to give them this color-coded spreadsheet. That's pretty boring. But you can give them a brief, a presentation that shows them, hey, check it out. Here's the pros, here's the cons, with the value prop, and have quantitative and qualitative data points all up on the screen that they can then look at to form their opinion after they leave, so they can really see that A, you did your homework, and B, why you got to where you got with your thinking. So of course I had to do some competitive research to understand who were the other people competing against me to get these flats in Berlin. You know, such as this family of 4 plus Uma. Grandma was going to live with them too. They went for the old school flyer. They had 2 kids. I was like, well, you know, a lot of people, some people that manage flats may not want a big family. So okay. They seem very nice. This flyer looked like they didn't put too much work in it. I thought, I could do better than that. Then came mama with a baby. I thought, well, that's, you know, it'd be nice to help her out, but maybe the baby's going to make a bunch of noise. Then there's these guys. They were offering a reward. They were in their 40s, and they were psychologists working for the state, so they're definitely cooler than me in terms of, you know, not being like uber capitalist. And so then came like someone using color and really cool copy, you know, a little bit more design. And then this guy with his really cute, sketchy things. And, you know, they were using the flyer pull-offs. I mean, it was just kind of overwhelming. And then I got to this one with these 2 cute girls offering a reward of 1,300 euros, and they're students, and they're studying. And they had their flyers all over a Keynesian Keats. So I was like, oh, God. Wow, this is my competition. Okay, hold on. So then I thought, you know, I think I need to do an ideation workshop. You know, let me think about ideation workshops and what that would be like. Now, I do them professionally all the time. I work for a financial institution in New York. I have to often bring product teams, stakeholders, design teams together to really get everybody aligned on what are the business goals, long-term, short-term, what are our drivers, what are we really trying to do, and ultimately take everything we have discussed, that's in a fig jam board in this case, and take them through a bunch of activities so that at the very end we have some kind of output, some kind of consensus that shows progress. And when we do ideation workshops, you know, they're live. There's a lot at stake. So you need to think about them before you just like do one, right? You want to pinpoint the workshop goals and a successful outcome. What is that? Because you ultimately want to work your way backwards. You do not want to spend more than 5 minutes on icebreaker activities, especially ones where they're teaching them how to use a fig jam board or a Miro board. That's ridiculous at this point. Most people have experienced them, and if you spend more than 5 minutes, I feel like already you're just like setting yourself up as a hack. Identify the right attendees and send out hold invites immediately for the ideal date and length. I tend to not try to have workshops that are over 90 minutes. Sometimes it has to be 2 hours because people tend to show up late where I work. But I definitely send out it for enough time, and if I can give back the time at the end, that's great. But I will book these things 3 weeks to 4 weeks in advance because the important people are going to have really filled calendars. Do not use Can, Miro, or FigJam templates with zero customization. That's just ridiculous. I see people doing that. They're just like, I'm prepared. They just pulled in a bunch of templates, threw them on the board, and we're like, we're going to do the 5 whys, and then we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and it's going to be so fun. We're going to design things together. No, that's not how it works. You need to really think through what you're trying to get to and plan out each of the activities, time boxing them if you have An hour, that means 3 15-minute activities. And really think, what is the order that I want to do these activities so I get from point A to point B? Work up this agenda with this focus on what the goals are, and don't improvise. Don't wing it, right? This is a really good opportunity to rehearse it with a colleague and see if it flows or not. Right? It's really, really important that you go through these activities to see if what you have planned actually will work to get you to the final activity and have that aha moment that's either going to be, okay, we have a bunch of proof of concepts, or, okay, we need to have a follow-up workshop. Don't let people just start solutioning, right? That's not the time or the place when you're doing an ideation workshop. It's to come up with a bunch of ideas, but not to work one or two of them out. Save that for the next one. Save that for the prototype experiments. Run the workshop using timers. Have someone who's going to keep track of the time. Have someone who's going to keep the sticky notes organized. Put them in groups so that they're themed, and keep things moving, right? And then one thing that I see over and over again is this walking away from a workshop saying, here's the board, later. No, not okay. Do not forget to send out a readout summarizing what happened with the next steps. Otherwise, what's the point? I typically take screen grabs from the FigJam or the Miro boards and create a brief that they can then look back on and say, okay, here's what we got, here were the key takeaways and the next steps. So it came time for me to have one for my flat hunt, right? So we had a board of a bunch of different ideas. I brought together my girls in Berlin who were very creative, who had recently found flats, and we came up with a ton of different tactics that I could try. They even thought, like, if I didn't find one by the time I did this presentation, that I would ask you all if you know of any flats, and that could be my new jam. So now it was time for customer interviews. Now, customer interviews are not necessarily with customers. They could be with employees. They could be with just users who aren't paying for the product. Now, in some cases, I'll interview employees in groups who have the same role to really understand what are the pain points when they're using a particular system or platform and they're trying to do their job. These were a bunch of people who worked in IT and just had so much pressure on them. And so really understanding, what it is that they're trying to accomplish and where they were hitting walls really helped us to figure out what's the best platform that they should move to. So when you're doing these interviews, you want to ideally start with a proto or provisional persona that you can then match the people that you're talking to and say, okay, we have them that fit into a particular segment, right? Because you want to try to make, especially these, what are qualitative interviews, come up with quantitative information at the very end. You want to recruit participants. You don't want to recruit participants who don't pass the screener. It's not to be random. This isn't guerrilla style when you're doing customer interviews professionally. Ask questions that validate or invalidate the problem statement and the personas. Use the personas as a way to come up with questions. Every single bullet on there, if it doesn't have a question that you can validate to or invalidate, then get it off. If it's like, everybody has dogs, and you ask them, and they're like, what does dogs have to do with the value prop for a ServiceNow platform? Get it off there. Any details that are irrelevant, not important. You're trying to really focus on the things that you're going to see across a particular segment. Avoid asking leading questions, we all know this, or close-ended questions. We want to get them talking. Rehearse your intro and your questions in a pilot study to ensure it flows. Test it for time, test it for that they understand it. Really rehearse it. Do not just say, okay, I'm going to stick with my script, because sometimes it just doesn't seem natural. So you want to, not feel like you have to just make things up, at the last minute. But at the same time, you want to be able to just ask a follow-up question if it's the right thing to do at that time. Record your interview so you can focus on engaging with each participant. And after you interview about 5 people, look at what you learned and say, do I see patterns, or do I really need to keep interviewing more? It might be time to rinse, repeat, and come up with a different segment or a different problem statement that you can validate. And then, of course, create a readout document that shows your major findings and takeaway. And if you need to interrupt, do it politely. Like, sorry for interrupting, but blah, 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 blah. As far as the readout, you then have your output that you could then present back to your client or to the stakeholders. Here's what we learned that has the major takeaways, and so forth. Now, I had to think, who are my customers, right? Who are the people that I'm trying to reach? It's the management companies. And yeah, you can Google a bunch of management companies, but I was out there putting up flyers. So I thought, I know, I'll just bum rush the doors and take photos of all this meter information, the landlord information that was posted in each of these buildings that were in the neighborhoods that I wanted to live. And then have a letter that I could write that let them know that I would be following up with a call, but introduce myself and sent them some information. Thought this might work. Then came time for some prototype experiments. Now, prototyping is something I truly love. The big idea with prototyping is, I think, is you want to really tell the story of the value proposition. I can start with the storyboard. That's something I always do, a narrative that takes them from the problem statement to the value proposition and through the key moments of the experience, and then ultimately come up with a high-fidelity prototype that guides them through this so they can really see it. Now, there's lots of do's and don'ts. Think of the prototype as something to concierge the experience. Think hard about the key moments that they need to see. Don't think a low-fidelity prototype will actually work for concept validation. This idea like, oh, we'll leave it up to the imagination of the participants. Why are they imagining for us? We need to do some of the imagination, and if we have a bunch of different ideas, contrast them. Show them idea A, show them idea B, and so on, to get feedback. Don't make them work so hard. Start with storyboarding, and this is something that you can do with your design team, and that way that you'll have closer consensus at the end. And don't let your designers build a prototype without some kind of script or storyboard or outline, because they could be working on this thing for months, thinking it needs to do everything. So write a script that focuses on the value proposition, and don't build some prototype that's like some beta version of 80s software. That's old school. That was what I did back in the day. It's not a way to do rapid experiments by building out, and it doesn't need to do everything. It just needs to be on rails and take them through the experience. Fine-tune it to make sure it really goes with how you're going to present it when you do the qualitative interviews. And then, of course, don't put it in front of participants without a discussion guide, at least in your head. Know where you're going. Test it on at least 5 people and see the reaction, and then rinse, repeat. But prototyping is actually, I think, absolutely crucial before building out a product, because you want to avoid burning your time, money, and effort on something that has not been tested and validated. And of course, you want to have output at the end. In my toolkit, I have another template for allowing you to do a structured interview. And so what you can then do is take that research and put it in some kind of a brief, right? And present it back. So now I had to do some experiments. So I created a flyer, the first one in German and English with the tear-offs. I put them up. Started raining that night, and the tear-offs looked like a mess. Did another experiment. This one I'm offering a 1,000 euro reward, and I'm holding up my little WhatsApp number and thinking, okay, this will get their attention. I said I'm going to focus on a particular Keats so I can really see if that improves things, keeping it more structured. And ultimately, someone put a little mustache on me, so I had to move on to prototype 3. this one, I thought, okay, I'll have 2 pictures, I'll have a bigger phone number, and I'll have this cool picture of me next to Karl Marx, and I'll focus it on Rote Insel, which is this like kind of commie, super left-wing part of Schönenberg, and I thought this will get a really great reaction. I must have had 500 flyers. That's 450 more than my other next competitor, and I littered all over Berlin with my flyers. And so it was time to think about the tactics, and I had so many. So tactic number 1 was to hit Emo Premium, get a premium account, and of course have the 5 checks, and some of them I had to fake with moving money between accounts so that Spark has a thought I was transferring. I just learned to put loan, good hold. And then boom, I got proof of income. That was really important because that way I could even get an interview. Then setting up these searches so that you could get different the flats sent to you as soon as apparently as soon as the listing goes live, having a perfect cover letter. But of course, by the time I was looking at these, sometimes over 1,000 people had contacted them. Tactic 2 was the flyers. I had to think like, okay, how can I even like one it up? I looked at this one on the left. I'm like, oh, he uses yellow and it's so cute. And the one on the right, ich bin nett. You know what that means? I am nice. Now, I'm not that nice, really. You know, I think people might describe me as a bunch of things, but nice would not be number 1 on the list. But I made a super flyer. I said, hallo, ich bin nett. 2,000 euros, right? A picture of a beer and, you know, everything in there. Just like, look at me, I'm yellow. So here came some of the responses. Jacob offering me a sublet. 2 women offering to take my 1,000 euros and help me find a flat. And then came a legitimate lead at the end. This gentleman wrote and said his dad had passed away, and they had an empty flat right where I wanted in Krellikiez. And he gave me the phone number and of the people running the building, and I called them. And they said, oh, I'm sorry, we've already given it to somebody else in the building. So tactic 3, I decided I needed to do some serious landlord spamming, right? I wrote 250 emails. Guess how much conversion I got? Null. Moved on to tactic 4, Facebook groups. So many things. I went to all the long-term housing, and it was just short-term housing, and then just like people asking for money. So many scams. I was really frustrated. I had now spent 30 hours a week for almost 4 months looking for a flat in Berlin, and I had nothing. I felt hopeless. I felt lost in my discovery phase. So I had to think about it. I had to really think about it. What was happening? Why was I was trying so hard, but I wasn't getting anywhere? So I thought, I need to eat my own dog food. I turned to page 6 of my book, and I read, strategy goes beyond the abstract nature of design and into the land of critical thinking. Critical thinking is a disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, and open-minded, and informed by evidence. What was my evidence? I could see that I was getting the notifications, but then by the time I clicked on them, they were deactivated. Or worse, already 23 people had clicked on them. So I thought, somebody must be scraping the web. Somebody must be doing something to get them before me, because I'm like a pretty fast clicker with my cover letter. And that was when I discovered the Telegram bot integrated with Premium Emo Scout. So of course, I went to Telegram. I joined that Telegram channel. I set up my bot to all my requirements. I connected it to my Emo Scout Premium. I went to sleep. I woke up. The next day, I got a listing for a place in Schönenberg. And then I immediately applied and sent her my cover letter. And this time I got invited to my first showing. I loved the place, and I got the contract. Thank you. Last week, I got the keys to my flat in Schönenberg, and I now have my own buzzer. I now have my own mailbox. And I actually got an attic apartment just like the one I first came to when I moved to Berlin. Thank you, guys. So remember to take risks and have an open mind to experimentation. Turn some of these projects that we have to deal with in life into an activity, into something that we can just feel okay about failing. You know, because failing is a really important part of our journey. And then, of course, ready for this? Jetzt habe ich alles. Ich muss nur mein Deutsch verbessern. Danke.